Health and Wellbeing Queensland acknowledges the Yagara and Turrbal people, the traditional custodians on the lands on which this podcast was recorded, and the traditional custodians on the lands and waters on which you are listening. We pay our respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders past and present, for they hold the memories of the traditions, cultures and aspirations of Australia's First Nations people. Hi, I'm Dr. Sam Manger, a GP and your host of this series, The Clinician's Guide to the First 2,000 Days, brought to you by the Queensland Government through Health and Wellbeing Queensland. Prevention across the first 2,000 days offers an opportunity for healthcare professionals to support generational health improvements. But preventative health will only be successful if it is done with confidence and empathy, and an evidence base. Over the course of this series, I will be talking to some of Queensland's leading experts to explore how they discuss preventative health and how to create meaningful change for the next generation. Let's get started.
Often parents will come and say, my child eats nothing good, but actually when you look at it, they do eat apples or they do eat carrot sticks. And then it's around, well, can we increase the frequency of how often they're having those really nutritious foods like the carrot sticks or the apples, because they may only take half of one in a lunchbox.
For our last podcast of the series, I'm delighted to be talking to Leonie Trembath and Fiona Nave. Leonie Trembath has a background in nursing, midwifery, child and family health, lactation and health promotion. She is currently the clinical nurse for child, youth and family health at South West Hospital Health Service at Childville, with outreach clinics across the hub sector. Fiona Nave is a senior public health nutritionist at Health and Wellbeing Queensland, with over 20 years clinical experience working as a paediatric advanced practicing dietitian with a specialised focus on restricting eating in children. Thank you both for joining me, Leonie and Fiona.
Hi, Sam. Hi.
Leonie, let's start with you. As a child health nurse, how do you encourage patients and engage them to come along to health checks with other competing demands that they might have, such as work or other young children?
Yes, Sam. Child and family health nurses actually work in the community as opposed to being in hospitals. So we actually offer free optional services within Queensland, and we have opportunities for them to present to clinics. We do home visiting as well and telephone consultations. And sometimes they have met child health staff during their antenatal visits as well, or their antenatal classes, depending on the communities.
So as a child health nurse, how do you engage parents to come along to these child health checks when they've got other competing demands? They may have work, they may have other young children. How can we really work with them to make it a valuable activity?
We certainly encourage them to come along with their personal health record book. That's their red book, and it keeps everything recorded there for them. So that way they have a record that they can take with them wherever they're travelling. And this record book helps provide every child in Queensland with these records of vaccination histories and developmental checks. They can keep that and take that to their local GPs and any other health professional as well. So they're not having to remember each child every time they go for a visit. And back to your question in relation to how do we make it worthy, immunisations, as we've now learnt from COVID, are really helpful for keeping the whole family and the community safe.
And what are some of the most common concerns parents raise with you about their toddlers, and how do you support them through that?
The most common concerns for toddlers would first of all be their behaviour at around about that 2 to 3 years of age, where they're commonly saying no, and then maybe that 3-year-old to 4-year-old toddler, it can be about the toilet training and teeth brushing and how they get them to do that.
And how do you support them through that? What's some of your sort of key points of advice?
Key points of advice are to make it fun, to be consistent, and we're not really going to be negotiating these, because as soon as you negotiate, the child is paying attention and it will be a negotiation each time. So it's making it fun and consistent.
And is this true? You mentioned challenging behaviours being some of the most frequently asked questions that parents will attend to you with when you're out in community. How can healthcare professionals guide parents in managing some of those challenging behaviours, whether it's emotional development or tantrums or separation anxiety?
I think supporting parents' awareness that these young little toddlers are actually learning their own emotions. So they will have their own meltdowns in an environment they feel safe with the people they feel safe with, and sometimes other people as well. So you being calm with them while they learn these emotions and letting them know what these emotions are called and how we can breathe through those moments as well. So not being triggered yourself and trying to stay calm. We aren't all perfect parents. Being a perfect parent isn't what we should be aiming for either.
There's some really great wisdom there. So being aware of our own response is key, and how we might get triggered ourselves by this whole situation. That generally doesn't help. Trying to identify what may be at the root of this or behind this or determining this. Allowing to some degree a child to experience their emotions, but at the same time being able to stay with them and then following that course and seeing where it goes. You mentioned before around the importance of vaccinations, and given that these are offered universally, how do you approach vaccinations? Do you feel there should be more of them, less of them? Do you find it readily well picked up and engaging, or is there resistance?
I think there's quite readily picked up. Parents do try to understand why there's so many immunisations in one injection. But again, the cleverness of that is we aren't giving many, many injections. Over time, we have better protection for the whole community.
Yeah, excellent. It's interesting that as GPs that people present and they're worried about having 4 or 5 vaccines in one needle. But the truth is that means you need less adjuvant and liquid and everything else. So it's actually you get less of those things, not more of them. So it's actually a good thing. So we've touched on a few areas where it can be challenging with toddlers and meals. So Fiona, what are some practical tips for setting up those healthy eating habits that will benefit children in the long term to potentially avoid those battles at meal times, which we know can happen?
For me, there's probably 3 main things to focus on. One would be eating together as often as you can, so that the parent does sit down when the child's eating. And lots of kids will eat alone or with a sibling. However, really encouraging the parent to honour their own hunger and nourishing their own bodies to sit together with their child and, if we can, be eating the same foods. The next one is around that role modelling. So we know about 5% of Australian adults eat enough vegetables on a daily basis. So even if they are eating them, the child may not be seeing that if they're not eating together. You know, the scenario where they might feed their kids go to bed, and then mum and dad eat together later at night. And that might be when the veggies come into play. So the child's never seen their adult enjoying or eating vegetables. So that role modelling by eating together, eating those hopefully healthy and balanced meals together. And then my third bit would be around that positive environment. So having a meal environment that is relaxed, where there's no forcing of foods, there's no coercing to eat, there's no, oh my goodness, we have to eat these vegetables, and if we do, we can eat ice cream, yay! It's just, these are the foods that nourish our bodies. These are the foods we know we need to be fit and strong. These are the foods that help us sleep. These are the foods that help us play, whether we be adults and kids. And then from that, if you're still hungry, we might, there is a snack later, which will hopefully also be a nutritious snack that might be based around fruit or dairy. So that positive food environment that has the adult sitting, role modelling and eating with the child will be the best way to reduce any food anxiety for the child and create healthy eating environments.
Yeah, I agree that, as you say, the together aspect, the role modelling aspect, which often go hand in hand, and the positive experience component is crucial. I find children, toddlers, to be much, much smarter than we give them credit for.
Absolutely.
And also clearly deeply curious about life. And the simple thing is eat your veg doesn't satisfy them because it doesn't satisfy their curiosity to a degree. It sounds like what you're recommending, especially on the positive experience aspect, is understanding what good this is doing to their bodies and why it is, so you can run faster and so you can make more noise and so you can do bigger farts or whatever it is, just to have a bit of fun with it. There's a great book which Professor Felice Jacker wrote, who's down at Deakin, called There's a Zoo in My Poo.
Yep.
And I went through that with my kids and my nephews, and they were so engaged. They were so engaged about what was happening inside their bodies when they heard about what the food was doing and how it changed their gut microbiome and how it changed the way their brains operated. It was quite inspiring to me to see how much they were engaged by it and how much they were keen to actually continue engaging with it, right? And so there's, to me, an element with the role modeling and the connection and the positive experiences that children do want this. We need to take this discipline out of it in a way. It's like we're the ones trying to discipline ourselves, but really children are quite engaged with these sorts of healthy behaviours. They're the ones playing. They're the ones moving.
Absolutely. And I think we forget how powerful our personal experience is that brings us to that table when we are eating. So if an adult has been raised in that environment where they were always dieting, or their mother or father were always dieting or putting that child on diets and they're now the adult, and that parent is having to eat the salad because they want to fit into an outfit for a particular occasion, then those nuances of I have to eat this healthy food starts to become like it is a punishment and it isn't fun, rather than, you know what, I really like these carrots because they're crunchy, and finding the foods that the adult likes to eat as well that are nutritious and utilising those, because there's no use pretending you like tomatoes if you absolutely hate tomatoes. But for a short time in the child's life, you can put tomatoes on their plate and they won't really notice that they're not on yours. Or you can have one tomato on your plate and they won't notice that you eat it or not. However, it's okay if that child doesn't like tomatoes or you don't like tomatoes, because there's a whole array of other vegetables that you and they will like, and you can celebrate eating those. And celebrate how they make you feel or how they create that zoo in your poo, as you were just talking about. And I love that book too.
Stay with us. We'll be right back to continue our conversation.
PodSquad is a free play-based learning app designed by Health and Wellbeing Queensland to help the families in your care develop and maintain healthy habits. In the app, children explore the magical world of Imago and meet the clever, colourful Epipod characters while they learn about healthy habits. Backed by behavioural science, the app explores nutrition, physical activity and sleep to encourage children and families to make lasting changes to support their health. Download PodSquad today on Apple and Android systems or search PodSquad at hw.qld.gov.au.
And now, back to the conversation. So coming back to health checks, Fiona, what are the best methods? We talked in past podcasts about how important it is to assess growth and developmental milestones. So this is something you would do as a core part of your job, especially around growth. So what are the best methods for assessing if a child is meeting the expected growth and milestones?
The best way to assess is to use standardised growth charts, and there's two main standardised growth charts. There's the WHO standard ones, which are in the Red Book, and then there's the CDC ones, which are Americanised and are relevant for children older than 2. So we use those to measure either weight and length or weight and height. And I do encourage all professionals, if they're seeing a child, to do their weight and their height, not just one, so that we can start to see where they are on that point in time. If they're only seeing them once, it will only give them that one moment. It won't tell them about the child's journey, where they've been or where they're about to head. And I do always like to remind parents that if I am seeing them, that this just tells us where they are right today. And actually what's more interesting is where they've come from before that and now where they're going. And the parent can use their Red Book, as you were talking about, to keep that monitoring to make sure they're following those trajectories that we really want to follow. And it doesn't matter so much where they sit within those lovely lines, but we really want them to follow that shape.
Stay along those growth curves. Obviously, you're an advanced accredited practicing dietitian, so healthy eating is core to your business. And it's got a key part in reducing the risk of chronic disease, which clearly we're here to talk about optimizing the health of families and children. So how does what a toddler eat impact their chronic disease and mental health risk from a developmental point of view?
It can seem really fascinating, can't it, that what you eat when you're little can impact your lifelong health so magnificently. And we know genetics play a role in chronic disease. You know, there are some aspects about people that we can't change, whether you're following health behaviours or not. But we do also know there's lots of modifiable health behaviours that impact your chronic disease risk. And those are things like your nutrition and your physical activity or your movement. We know that from a dietary perspective in particular, what a child's eating right there and then, for example, if their diet's very low in fibre or really high in saturated fats or added sugars or really high in added salt, it can start to impact their organs. And we're learning lots about how it can impact the gut microbiome. And of course, that then can have other impacts, which we're learning more and more about. And then the final one that is really influential in that 0 to 5s is that habit forming. In the first 2,000 days, we are forming lifelong habits. So, for example, if you're a family that like to have a takeaway on a Friday night, but you buy a bag of salad to go with that takeaway, that's helping that child recognise that, say with pizza, we have half a plate of pizza and half a plate of salad. However, if you're a family that has just the pizza on its own and might be with fizzy drinks and garlic bread, that child's learning that with pizza, I have to have those things as well. And that's just one example of many different types of foods that can happen. And it doesn't mean it's bad to just have a moment of pizza and garlic bread and potentially soft drink, because that's a one-off. But if that's always a habit, then that's going to be ingrained into that child.
What are some of the most common nutrition concerns parents raise then with you about their toddlers?
In terms of particular food groups, I think the most common ones that come up is children that aren't eating veggies, and often that children won't be keen on eating meat. If you know developmentally or how you chew meat, you actually do swallow a hard ball. So when you chew any other food, you attract water into the food, it becomes more mushy and we swallow it. However, when you chew meat, you actually take the water out and you're swallowing a hard little ball. So that is a learning for children that they have to develop. They're swallowing something that can feel a bit different from all other foods. Again, that's around repetition and experiencing it on a frequent basis. For veggies, I'd say it's similar. It's around role modelling and then that food frequency of how often are they being exposed to it? How often are they being role modelled that it's a really enjoyable part of everyday life to have veggies on your plate?
The enjoyable part is a key word there, because that's not what most people would associate with vegetables, especially sometimes vegetables are treated as a thing on the side and it's the sort of least attended part of the whole plate. But as you say, they can be beautiful and very enjoyable. But this opens up this area of challenging behaviours because, Leonie touched on this before, that there can be certain ones that frequently come up. And certainly I have experienced, and it seems relatively common, that particular foods or nutrients toddlers may avoid, in particular certain, meal times and things like that can be particularly challenging. How do you approach those situations?
As a dietitian, I'll do a much bigger deep dive into what a child's eating across a day, what sort of foods they're having, how much of those foods, and the frequency they're being offered as well. And I'll also look at the environment around how the food's being offered. Who are they sitting with for those meals, or where are the meals being offered? Are they being offered at a table or not? Are the parents involved? And if I can reflect on the most common scenario is that kids often end up eating alone, maybe with a sibling, if there is a sibling, or if they're still in a high chair, it might be that it's separated from the table and the parents are so focused on just feeding that child and potentially doing other chores while their child's eating that they aren't eating as well. So the child is really missing out on that role modelling opportunity of seeing what adults eat. And of course, within that, we'd then encourage that the adults are enjoying healthy eating, including lots of veggies on their plate, rather than enduring the veggies on their plate.
And given your special interest with restricted eating, I imagine that you often come across parents who struggle with battling meal times, maybe lunchtime or breakfast or dinner, depending on whichever one is to be battled that day. How do you manage that practically, and how do you encourage children to try new things, to explore and to have some better relationship with that food?
Again, I'd look at a much bigger deep dive of what's going on for that family and look at even what the family is doing well. So what can we celebrate around the food? Often parents will come and say, my child eats nothing good. But actually, when you look at it, they do eat apples or they do eat carrot sticks. And then it's around, well, can we increase the frequency of how often they're having those really nutritious foods like the carrot sticks or the apples, because they may only take half of one in a lunchbox. So can we have the other half at another point of time in the day? Or can we make sure that carrot sticks are offered every dinner rather than just once or twice a week? And then I'd flip it to that point of, and how can we introduce that real positive adult role modelling of, can the parent sit down to eat with the child? And it can then come down to talking around the adults' habits and how they approach their eating. Can the mum, for example, almost honour her own hunger? She needs to provide nutrients to her own body. And rather than sitting, running around trying to clean or hang washing, should she actually be taking a moment and sitting with her little one and having some food as well, rather than skipping the meal or eating what's left over on the plate or just having a cup of tea and a biscuit later, actually honouring her own body with food.
Absolutely, Fiona.
Another healthy lifestyle behaviour that is critically important, and we've touched on it, is that physical activity component. And Leonie, the focus on movement, not so much organised sport, but are there guidelines for this group, sort of 12 months to 5 years or so?
There are guidelines, and certainly Queensland Health has recommendations for the professions that work there. The other things to consider would be that we have the parent PEDS screening tools and also ages and stages screening tools that we help talk with parents to see if they're reflecting on all areas of the physical developments. And the first PEDS questionnaire is just simply about 10 to 12 questions. That's in the Red Book, starting at about 6 months of age, before each health check. And then if there are concerns that are revealed or that the parent's identifying with discussion, it may lead to an ages and stages questionnaire that is a little more comprehensive, but really starting to pin down what the concerns may be.
And part of that physical activity component, which has been raised a few times in this podcast series, is this idea of play and it being a critically important part of development. And we've sort of brought it in with a little bit around food as well, around the actual enjoyable experience of these things, bringing in the sensory experiences of those things. So how can healthcare professionals further support parents who may not feel confident to play with their children or they're not really sure what that means? What sort of things do you recommend?
Certainly there's an element of role modelling that we do while we're there with them to teach them having fun is when incidental play just starts to happen. And it is encouraged with also reading books and having the opportunity to go outside and do nature play, which might be in parks or simply the backyard. Just encouraging them to have full movement of the body, and there can be opportunities with little games that help with all of that. And these are identified on various websites, in fact, to help prompt those memories that they may have forgotten themselves with playing.
I do think with adults who don't feel confident to play, one of the most powerful things is, if they're not looking at their phone and they're actually paying attention to their child, the child will often instigate that play. Will say,
Yes.
come and read with me, or come down to the floor, and that can start to happen quite naturally if the parent's willing to spend that time. And I know we have research almost showing that parents are unsure how to play because they don't know how to cope with the boredom of that play can bring. Playing with kids can be a bit boring. It can be repetitive. It can have moments where nothing's happening or you're doing the same thing over and over again. So it can be around helping parents to understand that it might be a bit boring, but how powerful it is for their development and how changing that can be for that child to have those moments of impact, or moments of relation with their parent.
I agree, Fiona, and actually supporting the parents to understand just simply being with them helps their self-esteem, which helps them explore further play.
I'm thinking perhaps the best play is the one where you also get to lie down.
Oh, yes. I wrestle
Sleepy
with
lions.
Dad.
Exactly. Sleep like climb the mountain, the various games.
Yeah.
Are there any good, resources or directions you might point parents into who might be struggling in this regard, how to connect or relate to their child in these sorts of perhaps, less serious ways?
I think as Fiona's mentioned, if you are engaging with the child, they'll soon quickly show you what they enjoy and the delight when it's on their face to support that exploration into their body movements, but also their environment. There's just so much opportunity there. I think having play groups to go along where they can actually have other parents role modelling is something that's really helpful. Some parents just are great with playing. And also there's First Five Forever, which is a reading program where they sing and rhyme and have a lot of fun, and through libraries that's free. And then there's obviously the playgrounds as well.
Yeah, excellent. Now, to move on to sleep, which is the opposite of the play component. So many toddlers may not yet sleep through the night. How much sleep do toddlers need, and what tips do you give parents who are struggling to have their child either get to sleep or stay asleep, Leonie?
Toddlers need about 11 hours overnight, but 1 to 2 hours during the day is the amount of sleep they need as well. So good physical play certainly helps with that. We're lucky in Queensland. I think water play is very helpful as well. And then, of course, having good nutritious food is pivotal also, with the whole foods of everything that they've been eating during the day to help them sleep further again. It's all about a happy routine. Whatever might be necessary, some parents get very caught up with the curtains and the white noise and all of those sorts of things. Just start off simply at first and hopefully they'll fall off to sleep after a little reading of a story.
So start with the connection, start with the bond. This brings me to your area, Fiona, around, lots of parents might worry that their toddler hasn't eaten enough, a big enough dinner, that they won't sleep through the night. That's something common you hear. So they want to give them something else to eat to encourage them in the hope they can sleep. Is this warranted? Is this best practice?
I'd certainly always look at the child as an individual to explore, what they're eating during the whole day and in that mealtime before bed, and also look at their sleep routines. So, what's that environment like before bed? Some children use having a snack as a delay routine, delay tactic to get to bed. Some children might be using the food to actually fall asleep, for example, for a bottle. So it's looking at what the food is, how it's being taken in, and then also how frequent it's happening. If the child's more waking up in the night with food, again, I'd be exploring then what's happening in that moment when they're waking up. Is it actually that it could be responded to with more of a cuddle or a different type of reaction that doesn't require food? Purely because of that, once you start offering something once, it can become a habit. I'd always discourage anything that's going to encourage a 2 a.m. wake-up call for parents, because I know how precious sleep is for adults and children alike. But looking at the whole system of what's going on, I certainly would never, ever encourage starving a child. Mm-hmm. So it might be that they do need something at that moment, but can we slowly start to tweak it where they don't? Is it because they didn't eat dinner, but was it because they didn't eat dinner because actually they'd eaten at 5:30 a massive snack because they'd just got home from childcare? So we have to sort of unpick the why to start to move forward to say, well, that we don't want that to be the norm.
Leonie, is there any technology or mobile apps or online resources to make health more accessible and engaging, especially given you work in rural and sort of regional Queensland? That's pretty relevant out there, especially for parents of toddlers who are often very limited in time.
There are increasingly growing number of resources available. The Connecting to You free text messaging service for children under 5 years of age. And what they do is align it to their age group in their local area, letting them know of local resources and information. Other resources, of course, include the Raising Children's Network, which is a phenomenal national resource that a lot of parents can utilise for multiple topics.
Fiona, do you have many resources that you would commonly refer to?
For feeding young children, so under 12 months, I know we haven't spoken about that a lot today, I'd look at things like the Australian Breastfeeding Association. They have lots of great resources, or Nip Allergy in the Bub, which is around starting solids for children. Mm-hmm. For those that are older than 12 months, I think the Raising Children Network is a really good base that we know is evidence-based. From Royal Kids Hospital in Melbourne, I feel that it covers all the topics in a really nice way with videos and things. From a health professional perspective, Queensland Health has lots of great resources. And from a nutrition perspective, there's a toolbox called Go and Grow. It has lots of lovely resources that relate purely to nutrition for the 0 to 5s for health professionals to give on to parents.
Don't go anywhere. Our conversation continues after these messages.
Rising rates of chronic disease are one of our greatest public health challenges. 2 in 3 Queensland adults and 1 in 4 children live with overweight or obesity. We need to shift the dial. That's why Health and Wellbeing Queensland has created Clinicians Hub. Designed for health professionals to support preventive health, Clinicians Hub is a digital ecosystem of initiatives, resources and tools such as podcasts. It supports clinicians with referral pathways, models of care, education opportunities and more. Find out how Clinicians Hub can help you at hw.qld.gov.au/hub.
And now, back to the conversation. Leonie, when you're working as a community health nurse, I assume you interact with a variety of people from different backgrounds and different cultures, including First Nations Australians. How can we address, from a cultural beliefs and practice point of view, that may influence better food provision, sleep routines, movement, and bringing out the excellent components of their culture that are already there?
Yes, the Connecting to You program actually does have that support through those text messagings as well, and they offer them to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mothers and fathers as well, separate text messagings. And also the Ages and Stages has a tracks version which supports cultural diversity also. And some health services actually have an Outback Kids, Healthy Outback Kids, which has interpreted it in a more culturally friendly way also, some of the screening tools that are utilised.
Fiona, do you have anything to add given the work you do?
I think when I look at culture, when you consider it around food, I always approach it with an absolute curiosity about why that particular habit or particular cultural thing is happening. When it comes to food, you do see a lot of cultures that may want to pacify with food. So if the child's crying, give them some food. If the child's, looking at distressed in any way, give them some food. And it can be a really nice exploration to start with the parents, especially in a primary care context, of the why, why is that happening? And then also a gentle education around what satiety is to a child and what satiety cues that little one might be showing, even if they can't communicate with words yet. And then other things that crying could mean. That might mean they're actually tired, or their nappy needs changing, or actually that they just want to cuddle. So starting that gentle education of how the child's communicating, and that foods may not always be the answer. And then when they are, that's wonderful. And of course, we want children to grow up to be adults that can eat with mindfulness and have awareness of when they're full and listening to their hunger cues.
Yeah, excellent. Zooming out a little bit and looking at the child particularly, but now we'll zoom out and look at the parents themselves. And how can we better support parents who might be struggling to maintain their own healthy lifestyle behaviours? And we've talked about the importance of being a role model, but that can be tricky when it comes to healthy eating, devices and screens and movement and those sorts of things.
Absolutely. I think recognising where the parent is, parenting, working, adulting, it's all really tough. And I think it's even tougher with the busy society we live in at the moment. Everyone is always so busy and constantly feeling stretched for whatever reasons that might be for them. So empathising with that recognition of that it is really tough. When you have kids, you do realise just how tough that journey can be, and that we don't get manuals and that they're all very different. So recognising that journey of what the parent is doing well, what health behaviours would they like to achieve? What health behaviours are they doing really well right now? And it might be that when they go for a coffee in the morning, they then like to do some self-care by sitting on the veranda with that cup of tea. And that's a great start. Can they then extend that by trying not to look at their phone while breakfast is happening, so that the child starts to learn, and that tablets are not around the table at breakfast? And then that might mean that the child can then start to feed themselves because the tablet's gone away. And then that might also mean that the child sits better at a table, which can help with other meals. And that might mean that they actually have a positive family environment, that breakfast might feel calmer because the child's focusing on eating, which means the parents can focus on their own meals, which means meal times are less rushed, and, those flow-on effects of what's happening really nicely now, and can we add one to it? And then my last bit would be about looking at what can support that parent, whether that's a program that we can offer from a health perspective, like positive parenting programs or a cooking program, or is it actually looking at the supports around them in terms of their actual environmental supports, other family members, friends? Can they go for a walk with someone with their baby, both in their prams, and catch up that way rather than go to a coffee shop? They're then looking after their own health. And their children are probably happier because they're out in the environment and get to look at stuff rather than getting bored in a coffee shop. It can be those tiny tweaks that really, really help shape those positive environments that help the parent feel better as well.
Leonie, you are a community health nurse, and you're naturally, I would assume, thinking about the whole unit, the family, not just the child.
Yes.
And therefore you're thinking about how to support the whole family to live their best life, inverted commas. So what have you found to be potentially effective for looking at the whole family unit?
I think communicating with them in that partnership approach where you're actually genuinely trying to explore and understand what works for them. When families are tired, it can be really challenging for them to take on new information. So like Fiona was saying, is actually really understand what their environment is, the reasons that they're doing things, and see where you can maybe help tweak some more information for them to take on board to make it a little easier for them. There's so many little tidbits that can be dropped into a conversation that can help it be a little bit easier without them even being aware they've actually learned quite a lot in that session.
When you go, do you visit whole families in their home, or do you set up a clinic outpatient and people come and see you as a whole family? Or is it more still focused, is the culture and ideas still focused on the child?
Definitely the whole family, they're part of a whole unit, and whether it's just a small nuclear family of a parent and a single parent and a single child, or a much larger diverse family with aunties and uncles caring for them for the weekend and making sure everybody's informed. Certainly encouraging grandparents to come in if they have an issue of not understanding some change that they didn't use in their parenting. It's so much easier to talk to that grandparent and let them know some of the understandings we now have for them to support their own children and grandchildren.
So cost of living is becoming a bigger pressure for all Queenslanders and Australians. Fiona, this must be something highly relevant to you given the food is such an important part of our budget, but sometimes gets hit because people are trying to save money elsewhere. How do you adapt to helping people live with the current cost of living issues, and how do we expect parents to afford healthy meals or pay for kids to attend physical activity lessons?
It's a really tough one, and I can't see that it's going to get easier in any shape or form. Some of the research we have has shown that healthy or nutritious diet is actually more cost beneficial than a processed diet. However, that does require a full shift for the family, so it can be difficult when they're sort of sitting halfway in between. And I think it's very difficult for parents if they're trying to offer their child healthy foods that are constantly rejected. So we like to look at those ones that are cheaper, things like frozen vegetables. Having the peas and carrots on the plate every night can happen relatively at a low cost if they're frozen. Carrots are something that are cheap all year round, and it might be then exploring, how does the child want to eat those carrots? Are they raw? Are they steamed? Are they cut in discs? Are they cut in long strips with a hummus or something like that? So looking at how can we encourage health using what the family are already eating. And again, it's that +1 approach of how do we add one more thing to help that nutrition in the family. It could be adding lentils to the bolognese that they're already making, or adding the grated vegetables into that meat sauce that they're having. So adding that health in doesn't have to be really expensive. And when it comes to kids' activities, I like to encourage things like park runs are available for younger kids. There's a 2-kilometre one that's available in a couple of places across Queensland. Or they could even start to do what we call the park walk with their parents, where they do start to do that walk. It's 5 kilometres, but that's okay because it doesn't matter how long they take. And as toddlers, they might be in the pram. Maybe they run or walk for a little bit of it. And lots of parents really enjoy that, again, if you add that socialisation element into it. You don't have to pay for organised sports, especially when they're little. However, that movement is really, really important on a day-to-day basis.
And Leonie, you must also see the impact of the cost of living on families.
Yes.
And so how do you help them navigate this?
Reminding them that there are pram push groups where families can go out and push the pram together and go around parks, and creek bed play and beach play is so much fun. Water play is just key for children. They enjoy that so much. And also, I've mentioned it earlier, nature play has a list for each age group where they can go and find a leaf that's red or a stone that's black and gather them and have some exploring fun as well. Always being mindful that a hat and some sunscreen is always good when we're outdoors as well.
Yeah, can't forget that sun smart advice. Well, thank you both for joining me so much. And I think there's a lot of excellent content in here, and I'm sure listeners will appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.
Today, we've been talking to Fiona Nave and Leonie Trembath about nutrition and toddler health. For more information on today's topics, visit the Health and Wellbeing Queensland website at www.hw.qld.gov.au. If you've liked today's conversation, be sure to subscribe for future episode updates. Thanks for listening to this series, The Clinician's Guide to the First 2,000 Days. If you've enjoyed listening to this series, please spread the word with your colleagues and friends.